As the morning light crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Maplewood, Jane Hartley inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp autumn air. Fall had transformed the small town, with its trees wearing brilliant coats of orange and gold, but there was something more unsettling in the atmosphere than just seasonal change. The chill that ran down her spine had little to do with the weather. It was the collective anxiety of the townspeople that tinged the air with a palpable sense of dread. For weeks now, odd occurrences had rattled the residents. Missing pets, flickering streetlights, and whispers of unearthly sounds at night spread like wildfire through the local diner. Where the coffee was served with a side of conspiracy, an aspiring detective, Jane had always been drawn to mystery. Growing up, she devoured classic whodunits and eagerly scrutinized every detail of her surroundings. With her sharp eyes and insatiable curiosity, she often found herself solving minor disputes among neighbors or piecing together the whereabouts of the lost cat. This passion, however, had always been a mere game, until now. There was a gravity to the atmosphere these days that hinted at something deeper than the usual small-town antics. As she walked toward the Maplewood Gazette, where she worked part-time as an assistant, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the cusp of her first real case. The bell above the door chimed cheerily as she stepped inside, but her heart raced with anticipation. Clara, the newspaper's editor, was already perched behind her cluttered desk, poring over various articles. "Good morning, Jane," Clara greeted her, her tone lighter than the concern etched across her brow. "I hope you're ready for another day of mundane tasks." Jane wasn't so sure about the mundane part. Just yesterday, the paper had reported yet another unexplained event. The old Miller house, long abandoned and the subject of countless local myths, had been the site of strange noises and flickering lights. Jane had passed the house countless times and had always felt a magnetic pull to it, as if it held the secrets of history in its dilapidated walls. Falling into her daydream, she mused on the stories she could uncover there. "Actually, I was thinking," Jane began cautiously, "that maybe we should look into all these strange happenings? I know it sounds silly, but what if they're connected?" Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean to say these incidents could be more than just coincidence? A theory of yours? Think about it. Missing pets, the incidents at Miller House, and the folks saying they've seen strange figures moving in the woods at night. It could be a sign of something bigger. I bet there's a connection in the town's history that we haven't even unearthed yet," Jane urged, her excitement bubbling over. Just then, the door swung open, and in strutted Mr. Thompson, a disheveled man with a wild shock of gray hair and spectacles that slid down his nose. "Jane, Clara, you won't believe what I saw last night," he exclaimed, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Go on, Mr. Thompson," Clara encouraged, her interest piqued as she leaned forward. "I was out back, tending to my garden when I heard it, the sound of terrified barking, like my dog was in trouble. I went to the woods, but all I found was a glow, like a lantern, in the distance. Then poof, it was gone. Just like that." He snapped his fingers for emphasis, his agitation almost infectious. Jane's pulse quickened. This was the kind of lead she had been hoping for. "Did you tell anyone else?" "Only the sheriff, but he waved it off as hallucination. Maybe he's the one who should learn to observe more closely." Mr. Thompson huffed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Clara exchanged a glance with Jane, a surge of determination passing between them. "We need to investigate this further. There's more here than meets the eye," Clara said, her journalistic instincts ignited. After a few minutes of brainstorming, they had a plan. Jane would gather background information on the Miller house, while Mr. Thompson documented any further phenomena he encountered. Clara would begin interviewing locals to piece together any forgotten stories surrounding the old home. The pieces were falling into place, and Jane's thoughts raced with the possibilities. The trio set out on their respective tasks, Jane's pulse thrumming in her ears as she made her way to the Miller house, a crumbling monument to the past. The more she learned, the more she felt the weight of the history pressing down on her, whispers echoing in the corridors of time. She recalled her grandmother's stories, recounted with a mixture of nostalgia and fear. Distant relatives of the Millers had vanished under mysterious circumstances, their secrets buried alongside their memories. As she stepped timidly across the threshold of the Miller house, the air in the entryway felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dust motes danced in the beams of light filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating the wreckage of forgotten lives. Her heart raced as she wandered deeper into the house, each creak of the floorboards setting her nerves on edge. She pulled out her notebook, jotting down her observations, noting the remnants of old furniture draped in white sheets like specters waiting to be freed. Suddenly, a rustle caught her attention. Turning sharply, Jane held her breath. There, just beyond her line of sight, a shadow flickered. Was it a figment of her imagination, or something more? She moved quietly, each step deliberate, the weight of the town's secrets pressing heavily upon her shoulders. The pulse of adventure quickened within her. This was it, the case that could define her, that would bring her dream of being a detective to fruition. She steadied her breath and ventured further, following the noise into a room that had once perhaps been a parlor, adorned with faded wallpaper and remnants of a bygone era. There, in the dim light, she caught sight of it, a lantern, its flame wavering. No one had lit it. It was as if the house itself had come alive, inviting her to discover what lay hidden within its confines. "Hello," Jane called hesitantly, channeling her courage into that single word. Her mind raced. Was she truly ready for what lay beyond? Secrets would surely unravel, and they would either free or ensnare her. But even as the shadows danced around her, Jane felt a surge of resolve. She would unravel Maplewood's mysteries, even if it meant confronting shadows from the past that some would prefer to remain buried. As she stepped closer to the flickering light, she knew that the adventure was only just beginning. Jane stepped out of the bustling cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee still lingering in her nostrils, mingling with the crisp air of the early morning. The town of Maplewood seemed particularly lively today, as if it knew that secrets were about to be unveiled. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and glanced toward the town square, where a small crowd gathered around the old clock tower. Most residents cast curious looks her way, their eyes reflecting a mix of intrigue and wariness. She was the outsider, an investigative journalist back to uncover the convoluted truths of her childhood home. Her first stop was to the local library where Mrs. Hargrove, the librarian, was known for her encyclopedic memory of the town's history. As Jane entered, she was greeted by the familiar mustiness of old books and the faint rustle of pages being turned. Mrs. Hargrove looked up from behind the counter, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Ah, Jane, back for another story?" she asked, a hint of nostalgia in her voice. "Actually, Mrs. Hargrove, I'm looking for something specific," Jane replied, leaning on the counter, her determination apparent. "I'm investigating the strange occurrences that have been happening around here lately. The lights in the woods, the whispers at night." Mrs. Hargrove's expression shifted subtly. Jane caught a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Oh dear. Maplewood has many tales, some better left forgotten. But if you insist, there are old records in the back, might help you." Grateful, Jane followed her to the back room, where dust motes danced in the filtered sunlight. As they sifted through the files, Jane found notes of past town gatherings, records of strange incidents, and whispers of a hidden clan that once lived in the woods. The Barlow family, a name that seemed to resonate with malice. "You should be careful, Jane," Mrs. Hargrove warned in a low voice, her lips pursed as she glanced over her shoulder, as if the walls themselves could listen. The Barlows weren't just any family. They had ties to, well, let's say some believed they dabbled in darker practices. "I'm not suggesting anything supernatural, Mrs. Hargrove," Jane assured her, her mind racing. "But if their legacy has left ripples in this town, I need to know." Mrs. Hargrove nodded quietly but stayed silent, a fleeting shadow across her face. Jane left the library, her thoughts swirling with what she'd uncovered. She had to speak to more locals. Each encounter might peel back another layer, revealing the truth beneath the surface. Next, she ambled toward the general store, run by old Mr. Thompson, who had a reputation for chatting too much, especially for those who were willing to listen. As she entered, the smell of aged wood and slightly stale bread enveloped her. "Jane, long time no see," Mr. Thompson exclaimed, wiping his hands on an apron dotted with flour. "You're here to investigate, I hear. What's the trouble with the young folks these days, All those strange happenings at the old Barlow place." "Exactly what I'm trying to find out," she responded, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "What do you know about them?" "Ah, the Barlows, most folks say they cursed this town when they left. But that's all just stories, right?" His eyes sparkled with mischief. "We're a superstitious people, but there's always some grain of truth. I'd avoid those woods if I were you. Heard whispers myself, late at night." Grateful for his information, Jane pressed him further. Whispers. What kind of whispers? Just can't make them out. But they creep with intention, if you know what I mean. Maybe go ask the old-timer down by the creek, Bill Jenkins. He's been around since those days. Every piece of insight was crucial. With a nod, Jane thanked Mr. Thompson and headed out. She felt a rush of purpose swell within her. Each interaction was a step closer to uncovering something significant. But as she walked, her mind drifted to her father, Sheriff Davis. He had already voiced his disapproval of her return to Maplewood and had warned her against stirring the pot too much. Their relationship had always been strained, exacerbated by the years apart and their differing views on what true justice meant. That night, Jane found herself at the diner, nursing a cup of coffee. The bright neon lights buzzed outside, illuminating faces lost in thought as they chattered over their plates. She spotted her father at the counter, his brow furrowed as he sipped his own coffee, deep in conversation with friendly yet cautious faces of the community. Pulling her resolve tight, she approached him. "Dad," she said tentatively, bracing for the mix of love and apprehension that had often colored their exchanges. "Jane," he replied, his tone a blend of disappointment and concern. "You're still digging into things you don't understand. There's a reason we don't talk about the Barlows. I need to understand, Dad. These whispers and strange events, it's not just folklore. People are frightened, and silence won't help them. The best thing you can do is leave it be, Jane. This is my town, and I know these people. They don't need you digging up old bones," he said sharply, his eyes suddenly cooling, turning the warmth of their earlier exchanges icy. "But it's my job to uncover the truth, even if it scares them," she countered, the tension thickening between them. "It's not yours to uncover if it means bringing more fear than clarity," he snapped, standing suddenly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "You think you're some kind of savior? You don't know the damage words can do. You don't know what you're up against. Then help me," Jane pleaded, her heart hammering in her chest. "If these stories are true, people are in danger. I can't just sit back and let it happen." For a moment, the world around them paused. Other diners stole glances, their whispers trailing off. The distance between father and daughter seemed more pronounced than ever. He sighed heavily, looking at her with a mix of weariness and love. "I can't stop you, but I won't stand idly by while you chase shadows. You come to me with evidence, not assumptions." With that, he turned away, leaving Jane standing amidst the clamor of the diner, her resolve hardening even further. She would prove to him that her search was more than mere speculation. The fate of Maplewood rested in her hands, connecting the past's mysteries to the present's chills. Determined, she left the diner, thoughts racing toward the creaking woods. There were shadows to chase, and she was ready to confront every fear. The web of secrets began to tighten around her, but Jane was no longer a hesitant observer. She was all in, driven by a need to uncover the truth that strangled her hometown, even if it meant risking everything she had left, including her relationship with her father. Every clue, every whisper, brought her closer, but it was up to her to unravel the tangled threads before they ensnared her too. Tucked away amongst the overgrown hedges and sagging rooftops of Willow Creek stood the town library, its once bright blue paint now weathered and peeling like memories long since faded. Jane approached the building with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She clutched the small stack of clues she'd gathered so far: newspaper clippings, old photographs, and the cryptic map marked with a red X and a series of numbers that hinted at locations long forgotten. Each clue felt like a breadcrumb leading her deeper into a mystery she felt compelled to solve. As she stepped inside, the familiar musty smell of old paper enveloped her, a welcome comfort amidst the storm brewing in her mind. Wooden shelves stretched toward the ceiling, lined with volumes of history and lore about the town. The dim light filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows, only enhancing the air of secrecy that hung around the place. Jane approached the front desk, where a gray-haired woman with sharp glasses perched on the tip of her nose sat reading the local newspaper. "Excuse me," Jane started, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for any historical records or diaries from the residents of, well, from many years ago." The woman looked up, her expression shifting from disinterest to curiosity. "What sort of incident are you interested in?" Jane hesitated, weighing how much she should reveal. "I think it might have something to do with a fire, and some disappearances." The librarian's brow furrowed as she set the newspaper down. "There was a fire here years ago. Tragic. Many families lost their homes. But disappearances? That part of history has always been a curious footnote. Jane felt a chill run down her spine. Could you help me find anything on it? With a nod, the librarian stood and gestured for Jane to follow. They wandered past stacks of dusty books until they reached a room marked archives. Inside, the air felt heavier, as if laden with untold stories. The librarian pulled open a file cabinet filled with brittle documents, pulling out a few worn folders. This diary belonged to a woman named Clara Allen, she said, handing it over. She lived through the fire and recorded her life in vivid detail. Wrote about everything from her family to the odd occurrences surrounding the event. Be careful with it, it's fragile. Jane accepted the diary with reverence, the leather cover cracked but holding a certain beauty. She spent the next hour seated at a heavy oak table, thumbing through the pages filled with a loopy script that flowed across the lined paper. The entries painted a picture of a community gripped by fear. Strange noises at night, unexplained shadows, and the growing tension between neighbors. One passage caught her eye. August 14th, 1923. Tonight, the air felt thick with anticipation. The townsfolk gathered at the old mill, whispering about sightings of a mysterious figure lurking near the edge of town. They say it's the spirit of those lost in the fire, seeking revenge. I don't believe in such things, but something feels wrong. The wood creaks as if it holds secrets, and I fear what they might be. Her heart raced. The parallels to her own investigation were eerie, and with a sense of urgency, she continued to read. Clara's words became increasingly frantic as she described the night of the fire. How it erupted so quickly, how the townsfolk blamed each other, and how several people simply vanished amidst the chaos. Jane's mind raced, connecting the diary's contents to the odd disappearances she had stumbled upon in her research. Just as Jane closed the diary, a shadow fell across the table. She looked up to see a tall man with an unkempt beard and a weathered face, a local historian known to some as the keeper of Willow Creek's darker mysteries. I couldn't help but overhear your interest in Clara Allen, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Jane felt a mix of wariness and intrigue. You know about her? The man nodded, leaning in closer, his eyes glinting with something Jane couldn't quite place. Most folks think her ramblings are just that, ramblings. But there's truth buried in her words. I've spent years uncovering the threads that connect this town's past to its present. What do you mean? Jane asked, the hairs on her arms standing on end. He glanced around the room to ensure they were alone. The fire wasn't an accident. It was something else. Clara spoke of a presence, a darkness that hung over the town before and after the flames. Although she felt drawn to hear more, a chill crept up Jane's spine. This felt dangerous, flirting on the edge of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. What are you saying? Is it possible that whatever happened back then is repeating itself now? Is someone in danger? The historian's expression darkened. I wouldn't dismiss it lightly. There are those who believe the fire was meant to cover up something far more sinister. Secrets tend to echo through generations. If you're asking questions, you best be prepared for the answers, because you may not like what you find. Jane swallowed hard, her resolve wavering. But I have to know. I need to understand what really happened. Then be careful, he said, stepping back, his voice barely above a whisper. There are eyes watching you. What has been buried should stay buried. As he left, Jane felt a tremor of fear settle in the pit of her stomach. The historian's warning echoed in her head like a haunting melody. She had already pulled back a layer of the town's past, and as much as she wanted to delve deeper, she wasn't sure she was ready for the truths that awaited her. With reluctance, she placed the diary into her bag and made her way back to the entrance, her mind racing. The weight of her discoveries felt heavier than before, pressing on her chest. The librarian's gaze followed her as she exited, a knowing look in her eyes as if she too sensed the encroaching shadows that lingered just beyond the door. The wind whistled through the cracks of the old library, carrying with it whispers of the past, secrets longing to be unearthed, but perhaps best left undisturbed. Jane stepped out into the world beyond, heart pounding with the thrill of the chase, yet aware of the darkness that seemed to linger just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Panic surged through Jane as the shadows around her deepened, swallowing the last remnants of twilight. She had always felt a pull to the secrets hidden in these woods, but now there was a palpable danger lurking just out of sight. She had received a series of anonymous messages warning her to stop her investigation into the local folklore surrounding the vanished townsfolk, but curiosity had always outweighed fear in her heart. Now she was beginning to question whether she had made the right choice. The thick canopy overhead concealed the moon, wrapping the forest in a shroud of darkness. The rustle of leaves sent a chill down her spine. She gripped the flashlight tightly, its beam flickering against the trees like a heartbeat. In the stillness, her footsteps crunched against the underbrush, each sound echoing louder than the last. She had come here to find answers, to trace the threads of a mystery that had lingered in her family for generations. But now, with every step, she was acutely aware that she wasn't alone. A sudden crashing sound broke through the night. Jane froze, her breath hitching in her throat. It came again, closer this time. Was it an animal? Or was it something more sinister? The questions churned in her mind as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Instead of running, she took a deep breath, recalling her grandmother's words about bravery and facing one's fears head-on. She was not that frightened little girl anymore. She was a woman ready to confront the ghosts of her past. Just as she prepared to move, the beam of her flashlight caught a glimpse of movement in the dense foliage. A figure, cloaked in darkness, darted between the trees. Her heart raced. She had to find out who, or what, it was. Gripping the flashlight tighter, she cautiously made her way toward the movement. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but something else compelled her forward. Suddenly, a growl erupted from the shadows, the sound sending ice through her veins. Jane spun around, heart pounding. The figure emerged, not human at all. A wild animal, feral and agitated, its eyes glowing ominously in the pale light. Before she could react, it lunged. Adrenaline ignited her limbs as she ran. The forest transformed into a blur of trees and branches, and all her instincts honed from years of training kicked in. She ducked low, weaving between thick trunks, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The creature pursued her, a relentless force in the blackness behind. As she dashed deeper into the woods, branches clawed at her arms and roots snagged her feet. She stumbled but caught herself, refusing to look back. Survival instincts surged within her, and she pushed her body harder. Jane had always been drawn to the thrill of exploration, but that had never felt as palpable as it did right now. She felt alive, teetering on the edge of fear and exhilaration. With each beat of her heart, she understood that this was more than just a physical chase. The darkness surrounding her was not just the absence of light. It was filled with the weight of her family's history and the whispers of the people who had disappeared. The danger wasn't just in the woods. It was woven into the very fabric of her quest to uncover the truth. In a breathless dash, she stumbled upon a clearing, the moon finally breaking through the clouds above. The white light bathed the ground, revealing an ancient stone structure half buried beneath creeping vines. Relief washed over her, mingling with confusion. Was this the place she had been searching for? Or was it a mere diversion crafted by the forces trying to thwart her? The growls grew louder as the figure emerged once again, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was larger now, its shape more defined. A wolf, its eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and predatory intent. Jane backed away from the clearing, glancing over her shoulder, searching for an escape route. The shadows pooled around the edges of the clearing, making it impossible to trace her path back. As the wolf advanced, Jane felt a connection to the creature. There was something familiar about its stance, a kinship that crossed the lines of fear. She stood her ground, her breathing steadying as she locked eyes with the beast. This was a moment of truth, an opportunity to confront both her fears and the mysteries that had haunted her family. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, the words escaping in a breathy rush. The wolf paused, its head tilting slightly to the side. In that instant, Jane felt as if she were standing on the brink of understanding. The wolf was not just a predator in the night. It was a guardian, an embodiment of the past that had always been shrouded in mystery. The air crackled with tension as shadows shifted once more. A deeper growl resonated from behind her, pulling her from the moment. In an instant, she turned, eyes widening as a dark figure emerged from the treetops, silhouetted against the moon. It stood tall, its features indistinct yet imposing. Jane's heart raced. This was the force that had been watching her all along, keeping her from the truth. Instinct kicked in, and she dashed back towards the trees. The wolf let out a sharp yelp as it followed her retreat, the shadows scattering before them. Jane's feet pounded against the earth as she ran, adrenaline fueling her flight. She weaved through the trees, each turn feeling more desperate than the last. The figure pursued her relentlessly, but the wolf stayed close by her side, a steadfast ally in the chaos. In a brief moment of clarity, Jane remembered her grandmother's stories, the ones that spoke of the guardians of the forest, spirits that carried wisdom from the past. At that moment, she was not just running, she was reclaiming her legacy, her past crashing into the present with every step. In an explosive burst of energy, she broke from the thicket and stumbled into an open space, a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. The moon hung high, illuminating her surroundings like a spotlight. With nowhere else to go, she turned to face her attacker, heart pounding wildly in her chest. "What do you want?" she shouted, her voice steady despite the fear that coursed through her. The figure halted, and Jane could finally see its face illuminated in the moonlight. It was a man, features twisted with malice, eyes dark and cold. "You should have stayed away," was all he said, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "I want the truth," she cried, channeling all her fear and frustration into her voice. "I know you're hiding something, about the townsfolk, about my family." At her words, a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. For just a moment, the grip of power slipped from his hands. The moonlight glinted off the wolf beside her, revealing a fierce determination in its gaze as it circled protectively around Jane. "Listen well, girl," he said, the menace lacing his words. "Some truths are meant to stay buried. You're meddling in things you can't begin to understand. This will only end in pain." Pain. The word echoed in her mind, mingling with her memories of the vanished townspeople. Jane felt a surge of defiance. "Pain isn't something I'm afraid of. I'm ready to face whatever it is you're hiding." She took a step forward, emboldened by her resolve and the presence of the wolf. In that moment, her past and present intertwined. The chase through the woods had awakened something within her, a desire not just to uncover the truth, but to confront the shadows that had loomed over her family for so long. Jane inhaled deeply, her heart steadying. Whatever this man was hiding, she would find a way to shine a light on the darkness, to connect the threads of history to the choices she made today. Before she could react, the man lunged forward, and instinct guided her as she sidestepped him, adrenaline surging through her veins. The wolf leapt into action, intercepting the man and sending him reeling backward. Jane took the moment to regain her footing, her pulse thrumming in her ears as she grasped the gravity of the night. She could no longer be a mere observer in her own life. The woods held the key to her family's history and now, to her strength. Whatever lay hidden, she'd face it head-on, armed with the conviction that her ancestors had fought for their truth. And now it was her turn. As the wolf returned to her side, Jane prepared to confront whatever awaited her in the shadows, ready to uncover the secrets that had haunted her family for generations. She had embraced her fears, transformed them into courage, and now the chase was just the beginning, a stepping stone into the unknown, a journey she would see through to its heart. Jane stood in the dimly lit room of the abandoned mill. The air hung heavy with the scent of rust and decay. Shadows danced along the walls as the light flickered from the overhead bulb, casting elongated silhouettes that created a sense of unease. The confrontation she had dreaded was finally upon her, and the thought sent a chill down her spine. She drew a deep breath, her mind racing with the implications of what she might uncover. This was not just a matter of her own integrity, it was about the very fabric of their town. "Why, Grace?" she called out, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Why did you do this?" Emerging from the shadows was Grace Holloway, the town's beloved librarian. At first glance, she seemed every bit the picture of innocence, with her kind eyes and warm smile. But beneath that facade lay a complexity that Jane had failed to see until now. She had uncovered the truth, faced her fears, and united her community to stand for what was right. In the wake of her revelations, steps were taken to bring the corrupt officials to justice, and Millstone began a long and arduous journey of healing. The townspeople rallied together, reclaiming their sense of community, instilling new leadership that vowed to restore faith in their government. Though her relationship with her father remained strained, Jane understood that sometimes truth came at a price. Each day since had been a lesson in resilience, in not only standing up for what is right, but in the courage required to confront the uncomfortable. With that newfound strength, Jane decided to pursue a career in detective work. The passion that had ignited within her, the thrill of unraveling mysteries and finding justice, felt like a calling. As she looked towards the future, the pain of her strained relationship with her father dulled, and instead, She focused on the glimmer of hope surrounding her. Millstone was healing, and so was she. With the lessons she had discovered about truth, corruption, and the power of community, Jane felt equipped to take on the world, undeterred by the shadows that once loomed over her. She would be the protector of the truth, not just for herself, but for everyone who called this town home. The narrative had shifted, and within that shift was a promise of hope, change, and resilience.